Hey y'all, Hariom Tatsat. Welcome to Chit Chat, where our interest is getting our shit together. Following the dictum, material well-being follows spiritual well-being. Chit means knowledge as enlightened awareness. The work required to remove the delimiters on our own awareness so that said enlightenment can manifest is what we're all interested in. I'm Jaya, this is Kishore, and we're here to have a little chit chat. What are we talking about today? We're going to start off with the very anticlimactic inauguration, just as a springboard into the actual conversations we want to have centered around sort of spiritual responses to the inauguration, or really to politics. It is a theme that's come up a lot in Chit Chat because of that really dramatic 2020 year. And the inauguration was really the culmination. I mean, it was really hyped up. It was literally, for me, it was like watching the trailer for a movie. They had the military come in, like, I don't know how many military men were coming in, some number like 20, was it 20,000? Some huge amount. And I was personally very uncomfortable or nervous that something really was about to, it was ramping up and something was really bad was going to happen. It was going to really affect the country. And I still think something really bad is going to happen. I mean, we have the whole 2021 left, but I was really grateful to see an anticlimactic inauguration, just like basic standard inauguration, which was good. But what was interesting was the responses to it from our own devotional community and sort of the division there. So we want to kind of get into that. I think we have some interesting ideas. Yeah, you want to say something on that?
Yeah, no, I was just going to echo that the inauguration was so anticlimactic that the kind of like biggest thing that came out of it was the Bernie Sanders meme, right? With the mittens, him kind of sitting like this. And then lots of memes about J-Lo and Lady Gaga. And I mean, I'm also going to put myself out there, and this will show how much what my relationship is to US politics at the moment. But I kind of just was like, let me listen to Lady Gaga sing the US national anthem.
I resisted it. I literally resisted it because I don't think she can sing.
So yes, she can.
Really?
She can
okay.
Sing.
That's not fair because I haven't really ever listened to her, but she doesn't look like she could sing to me.
She can. She can
really?
sing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I believe
she's you. She's one of those divas that can actually sing. So she was really good. J-Lo was okay. And that was
so these are the highlights of the inauguration.
These are the highlights.
Not the important stuff, but a meme and Lady Gaga and J-Lo. Okay, interesting. She can't sing. Jagadish Hari is agreeing with you. Whatever. I think she's kind of demonic. So therefore, I got some other stuff on that. So that is neither here or there. I want to get into a quote that one of our friends shared on his Facebook.
Yes.
You know the quote. I'm gonna read the quote out. And that's used as a springboard into the spiritual perspective of what's going on in the political landscape and the Kali Yuga world in general. So here's a quote. This is from Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Anyway, I'm reading it. Oops, sorry about that construction in the background, y'all. Anyway. So every one of us who is actually afraid of the Asuric rulers, Asuric means demonic, basically, or ungodly rulers, and politicians must welcome this incarnation of Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, 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 Hare Hare. Then we will surely be protected from the harassment of Asuric rulers. At the present moment, these rulers are so powerful that by hook or by crook, they capture the highest posts in government. Anyway, we're not going to go there, but there was a lot of talk about fraud surrounding this. I'm not saying it is or isn't, but just to this point, by hook or by crook, and there was a lot of doubts about that. By hook or by crook, they capture the highest posts in government and harass countless numbers of people on the plea of national security or some emergency.
I wonder what that could be.
Was nothing, but taking in this context, we got our speculations. Then again, one Asura defeats another Asura, but the public continues to suffer. Therefore, the entire world is in a precarious condition, and the only hope is this Hare Krishna movement, a turn towards, just as a general point, Srila Prabhupada, the founder of the Hare Krishna movement, before he founded the Hare Krishna movement, he started a fortnightly magazine called Back to Godhead. Now, this phrase, Back to Godhead, people generally take it to mean back to the spiritual world, because that's how it came to be used a lot in the writings and the scriptures, which Srila Prabhupada was commenting on. But the first article of Back to Godhead magazine was not about going back to the spiritual world, but returning to a more spiritually oriented way of existing. And Prabhupada's point is that there's a phrase in that first article, which is really beautiful, that if we don't turn towards God or towards a more religious orientation of existing, or spiritual orientation, if you feel more comfortable with that word, then human life will end up shipwrecked on the rock of human selfishness. Really powerful statement. And so similarly to this statement we're reading now, because we have rulers, one after another, who refuse to give guidance for how to turn to a more God-oriented or spiritually oriented way of life, which is the actual solution. And this is coming to a more metaphysical understanding. For Gaudiya Vedanta, theistic Vedanta, we say that the root cause of suffering for all entities is obliviousness to God, basically. You could throw in another word that you feel more comfortable with, the divine or spirituality, whatever. Bhagavat Vaimukya is the technical term for it. Being oblivious, or the absence of awareness of God. Like on a moment-to-moment basis, that absence of awareness of Bhagavan, or God, is the ground for ignorance. And from that ignorance means a lack of awareness of one's own self, like one's own self as a spiritual entity different from matter. And from that lack of self-awareness, not self-awareness like you got bad qualities, that lack of self-awareness is there too, but this is a more fundamental lack of self-awareness. You're not aware of yourself as a spiritual entity, then that sets the ground for material identity. And from there, the fun begins, all the suffering. So the solution, if that's the root cause, the absence of awareness, then the root solution is turning towards God, becoming aware on a moment-to-moment basis. And that was the inspiration for this Back to Godhead magazine. But we have rulers that don't turn our awareness towards God, doesn't turn our awareness towards spirituality. And then the whole world is left in a precarious situation because of this. That's the last sentence. So how are you hearing this sentence? This caused a little, this is an interesting statement. And I know, like the world outside, the world in our spiritual communities are also divided. And so, there are certain spiritual devotees who hear this statement is like, yeah, Prabhupada is nailing it on the head. And I'm definitely one of those devotees that it's like that. I'm just being fully transparent here. I definitely have that particular bias. I'm trying to be neutral during the conversation. And then you have other devotees like, okay, I get what's being said here, but don't take it out of context because, maybe the new leadership is better, or certainly anything after Trump seems to be better for some people. And so this statement shouldn't be taken out of context to be as a wholesale rejection of leaders to come who certainly may want to do good. How are you hearing this statement?
Yes. So I also, like, on a first read, when I read this statement, I feel like, yes, like Prabhupada, like, get him, However, I do have, I think that's like my first reaction.
That's my first and my last reaction. So I'm just going to clarify my position.
I think that's my first reaction, but then I do have a moment of like, okay, let me try and put myself in like the other's shoes, people who are thinking like this and etc. And I really, what it comes down to is I really start to think about like the first thing that came to my mind when I read this, and I've read this quote before from Srila Prabhupada, is like, where am I placing my faith? That's like the biggest question that comes to mind when I read something like this. And I think that for me, when I see others, whether they be, God brothers or devotees or non-devotees or etc., when I see others like placing their faith in a political system, I have questions, you know, like I have a lot of questions about it. And usually my question is like, are you informed? Are you informed about the current political system, you know? And I think that that's a question that you would ask literally anyone about anything if they're saying that they believe in something or that they represent something, you know? And I think that that's why like religion and spirituality is sometimes so difficult, because when you were speaking about turning to God and going and speaking about Srila Prabhupada's Back to Godhead magazine, and at least getting us as a humanity, you know, as a human community back to this like higher state of being. It's like, it's interesting because the United States as a country supposedly is like God fearing, and supposedly in
Once upon
schools,
a time.
you know, in schools, I think, I mean, I haven't been in school in a while, but like I think in public schools you still have to, oh god, I'm showing my age. I think in public schools you still have to like stand up and do the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm pretty sure that you still have to do that. And the Pledge of Allegiance is like a very patriotic like thing, you know. And you know, it's one nation under God, indivisible, and then I can't remember the rest. But it's like, if you really look at kind of like US history and US politics, like there's a lot of God talk, you know, there's a lot of
Right.
God talk actually.
Right.
So it's interesting to know how that God talk has kind of become like
Divorced from the political discussion.
yeah.
I'm gonna be real with you just on that point. Um, I think more difficult than coming out like gay or LGBT of any type is coming out conservative. Like, you know, I was on that podcast with Nam Ross when we were talking about homosexuality, and I got tons of support from like everyone, my more liberal leaning friends, my more conservative leaning friends. I was getting support for everyone. I haven't like officially come out as conservative because I don't consider myself a conservative at all. I do lean towards things that are considered more conservative way of thinking, because for me they match what I've learned from Srila Prabhupada's books and other books of the Acharyas. So I tend to lean in that direction, not conservative, but towards what matches what I'm accustomed to understanding. But it does come off as conservative, and it's been a lot harder to be like bold about being. I forgot the point I really wanted to make though on that point. Anyway, what were you saying just now? I'm losing my train of thought on this. Anyway, carry on.
I was saying about that people should be informed of the things that they represent or the things that they say that they believe in.
Right.
That's what I was saying.
I had a point on that. It was something else you were saying. Anyway, carry on. Because
I was essentially saying, like, I think that most people, and we spoke about this kind of in the last chit chat, like most people, when they hear the word democracy, you know, like they maybe have like an image of what they think it means.
Pause. I'm remembering. I'm sorry.
Okay, go for it. Go for it.
When I came out of the ashram and I started to realize that my way of thinking was falling in a more conservative way of thinking, which I always would have thought my thinking was more liberal. I definitely thought that when I was in the ashram, but then when I came out and I started to get involved myself with hearing more of the political jargon and getting familiar with the political landscape, which I was completely cut off from when I was in the ashram by personal choice. I started finding myself liking the more conservative talking points and the conservatives who were sharing those points. But I stopped listening to the vast majority of them because they never talked about God. And I was like, isn't like God talk supposed to be like central to the conservative position? And all the conservatives I listened to, they were like God people. Like, you know, they showed some of their religious paraphernalia, you know, or they did get brought up on occasion, but it was never like a major talking point. So I became kind of disgusted with the conservative position as it's playing out today, because I'm like, where's the God talk? So sorry for that little hiccup in my train of thought. Anyway, carry on. Thank you for allowing me.
No, absolutely. And I think that that's a really good question. It's like, one, where is the God talk? And two, if there is God talk, is it all surface? Like, what does it even mean? You know, it kind of feels like fluff. And so I think that this is a really interesting point, because it's like, do we know, and I'm asking like in a general like, do we know what we're representing? And this kind of came out in the last chit chat, where it was like, I believe there was a listener who was watching, I can't remember her name, but she was just like, yeah, she was really agreeing with this point of like, when people say the word democracy, they have kind of an image of what it means, or they have some like memories of what it means. But democracy hasn't actually existed in its full definition of the word democracy. And so I brought up that point last week. And if you look at a word like communism, when you say a word like communism, people get all these images in their head, and they get like all this like, oh, evil communism and this. But again, communism is something that's very misunderstood, and it hasn't really existed in history, like really in its true form. And just to like move it on to the spiritual realm, I feel like this is a danger that's not only being faced in politics, but it's also being faced in spirituality and in all realms of life, of kind of like the watering down of what things really mean. So even when you say something like bhakti in spiritual circles, people will start to have, oh, well, bhakti means this or bhakti means that, and there's a bhakti chai and there's a bhakti this and bhakti bhakti bhakti. And it's like, no, actually there's a lot more to it than just that, right? And so I guess the point I'm trying to make is that, I personally, when I've been having this feeling of like, I want to read more and I want to do more research and I want to be very well informed. And I feel like that's what we need to do. I feel like we just need to be better informed, because it's so easy to get caught up in like the Facebook wars, and like this side is this and this side is that. And I drop this quote by Srila Prabhupada, and it immediately kind of bifurcates, like, well, I'm on this side and you're on that side. And it's like, okay.
Right.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm gonna 2 points you're bringing up in your what you're just speaking. One is on faith. Where is your faith actually going? Is it going towards new political leadership, or is it going towards something deeper? And that leads to questions like, how does a spiritual faith engage with such a world? And that's one of the main thrusts of the conversation that we want to build up on today. The other thing you're bringing up is about being informed, and I want to speak on that briefly. This is the more hard part today, because what I like to call information polychromes. A polychrome is like when you look at the sun and you look away, and then all those colors come in the eyes, and you're blinded temporarily for about 3 or 4 or 5 seconds. And so information, true information, let's not even get into the realm of misinformation, disinformation, all that. Just true information itself can be compared to the sun. It gives illumination if it's true. But if it's too much of it, then it creates polychromes where you're actually blinded by the sheer amount of information. So particularly when it comes to the political, because everyone's become a politician since 2020.
Yeah.
Right? And what I often hear from persons on either side is, you have to be informed. And I see that people are informed, but informed differently. Each accusing the other side of being misinformed, or, credulous or incredulous, as it were. And so when you have a Kali Yuga situation where truth is not central to the culture, there's nothing about our culture that speaks to me as being honest and truthful. Like what people can do with makeup now is dishonest. At this point, it's dishonest, or they have things like the filters. They have things like Facetune, so you can really morph the way you look just with these filters and plastic surgery. There's nothing about our culture, like the culture of editing. I think I shared this one time. I was watching, what do you call this? Like a singing coach. Is that what you call it? I guess singing coaches, a voice coach. And she was on a particular show called, I don't know, X Factor, one of these shows. And she was telling how they edited the show so it looked like she had beef with Christina Aguilera. Because they like asked her at her audition, who's your favorite artist? And she said Christina Aguilera. And then they edited that shot and put it next to someone else saying something to the effect that the guy asking the question, who's the worst artist in your opinion? And then they put that thing, Christina Aguilera, from what she was saying before. And she's, it was like devastating. She got over it and everything. So anyway, all I'm saying, there's plenty of factors in our culture, and none of them speak to me as being like thoroughly honest. Our mainstream media, alternative media, like none of it speaks to me as people where truth is like a central aspect of their life. So when you're talking about being informed, it gets that point to me becomes extremely complicated. That point makes a lot of sense when you have a culture where truth is central, and you have a culture that's not flooded with just information or flooded with just also misinformation. Then that point of being informed makes sense to me. But being informed in a culture where truth is not central, where there's just way too much information accessible, and to the point that you can always find support of your view despite actual facts, which is almost impossible to know, then the informed point doesn't seem to pack the same weight, to me at least, anymore. Yeah. So someone says, be informed. I'm like, you be informed. I am informed. I am informed too. And like, it just basically devolves into that, like children arguing. So just that point, maybe you have some comments.
No, I appreciate that point so much, because I mean, I'm kind of somebody that's just like, in general, I'm just gonna read Bhakti philosophy and texts, and that's what I'm gonna do. And like every time I kind of feel that urge to get to like, let me brush up on philosophy and let me brush up on my politics, I'm kind of just like, meh. And while the entire time that you were speaking, I'm just remembering this verse from Bhagavatam that we've brought up many times here in Chit Chat. And whenever I read this verse, I'm kind of just like, okay, so done. The answer is there. And so the verse is Canto 6, Chapter 4, verse 31. And it's saying, let me offer my respectful obeisances unto the all-pervading Supreme Personality of Godhead, who possesses unlimited transcendental qualities, acting from within the cores of the hearts of all philosophers who propagate various views. He causes them to forget their own souls, while sometimes agreeing and sometimes disagreeing among themselves. Thus, he creates within this material world a situation in which they are unable to come to a conclusion. Okay. And so, yeah. So whenever I hear that verse, I'm kind of just, and I see a lot of like the sides fighting in this. Like, I also feel that way. I also feel like, what's the point about being quote unquote informed about these like relative truth things that are going on in our world, when I should really be using this like one lifetime that I have to like take my spiritual life more seriously? Like, that's actually what I believe, But then I get caught up in like the political fray and this and whatever, and this person said this and this person said this, and it's like, juicy. I should, and then
it's like it's irresistible.
But then it's like there's that feeling of like, oh, I should know what I'm talking about, or like whatever, But okay. I mean, I don't get involved so much in the Facebook wars, but I do feel, okay, I'll end with this. I do feel that there is some sort of like, because I do agree that it's like an age of way too much information, and so much information that becomes misinformation. But I do think that there is some like virtue in like knowing your texts, like knowing your texts. So like if you're going to talk about, I don't know, like some philosophy like existentialism, then you should know who the existentialists are. This isn't just a word that I'm throwing around. Or if you're going to talk about communism, then you should probably have read the Communist Manifesto, and you should know something about it, And I think that in general, that's not the culture that we live in. The culture that we live in is we look at kind of like Google and what does it mean? Oh, it means this. Okay, now I know what it means. The end.
There's an interesting comment here from Kristen Mitchell. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that improperly. Truth seems to be based on feelings. Facts don't. I find it to be a very fascinating statement. And I do feel that this is, if you would permit me to make a comment about it,
please,
Kristen Mitchell. I wasn't asking you. I'm asking.
Oh, you're asking Kristen.
I find it seems like the word truth has undergone a sort of transformation over the centuries, whereas like in our postmodern era, the way that we use the word truth, like just as this comment is kind of indicating, that truth seems to be based more on feelings. Like they have even phrases like "speak your truth" or "speak truth to power," which is kind of very individualistic. Individualistic. I was supposed to say individualistic centered. That sounds really ghetto. Anyway, it seems like based on the individual, you know, and truth is a feeling instead of it being like something like, well, all men die. That's a truth to me, you know. It's not a feeling. So truth seems to be like a more exacting word that reveals things as they are, objectively speaking. But as it has gone, the centuries, as time has moved on and we've moved into a more postmodern era, truth seems to take more visceral level. Like truth is what you viscerally feel it to be, whereas facts aren't based on feelings, which I also find to be very interesting today because of the same problem that we're also indicating, that there's just so many facts out there. And there's enough to justify any position that you want to take. So much so that I've said it before here, it seems that views tend to be more important than facts in them, at least in the layman discourse about these big issues. It's more about your view than it is about the facts, which means to say it's more about what you feel something to be than what the actual facts may actually be. And again, as most millennials, we probably don't do too much research on the facts. So we kind of end up in the same problem, even with that sort of statement. I want to kind of shift gears here, though.
Yeah, I do too.
The informing part, let's just take it for granted. Everyone's got a point. All right, everyone, and usually that's what it is. Usually everyone does have a point. It's just everyone believes that they have the point, you know?
The point. People, so I have something to say. I have something to say.
Okay, let's just take it for granted. Everyone has a point. I want to go to the more interesting question for a spiritual practitioner. What does it say about our faith when we, when we're placing it in like a political leader, for example, or we're shining a political leader, in lieu of, we're shining a political leader because we say that he's a sorg or he's demonic or whatever. What does it say about our faith? And that's kind of the more interesting question I want to get to, because we have a C.S. Lewis quote, and we'd like to read this quote to you. It's taken from a book called The Screwtape Letters. And the book is basically about, Screwtape is the head of tempters, or little demons who tempt people, especially new converts to Christianity, away from Christianity. It's written by C.S. Lewis, so he was a practicing Christian. And the book is kind of exposing the different ways in which we get cheated out of a deeper faith experience. We get cheated out of deeper communion with divinity because of these different demons or fiends, which exist kind of in our mental space, or in the mental quantum, if you will. So he brings up a very interesting quote, how people tend to merge their political views into their faith, so much so that your politics determines your faith. And if you have a certain politics, that means you have a certain degree of spiritual realization, and if you don't have it, then you're. And I think this is kind of a more interesting thing. And are these two worlds, mutually exclusive, or are they together? And at what point do they touch together? And this is kind of the question we want to explore briefly in our short little chit chat here. So you want to read the quote? I think you have it in the thing.
Yes, I have it. So it says, "Let him begin by treating the patriotism or the pacifism as part of his religion."
Okay, well, keep in mind, this is the head demon boss speaking to those smaller ones and telling the smaller ones how to deviate their patients, that's what they call them, from deeper communion with God or with spirituality and so on. Okay. So
he's trying to convince them, basically. He's giving them like
the strategies that you need to do to deviate this guy from a deeper spirituality.
Okay, I'll read it more demon-like. Let him begin by treating the patriotism or the pacifism as part of his religion. Then let him, under the influence of partisan spirit, come to regard it as the most important part. Then, quietly and gradually, nurse him onto the stage, at which the religion becomes merely part of the cause, in which Christianity is valued chiefly because of the excellent arguments it can produce in favor of the British war effort or of pacifism. The attitude which you want to guard against is that in which temporal affairs are treated primarily as material for obedience. Once you have made the world an end and faith a means, you have almost won your man. And it makes very little difference what kind of worldly end he is pursuing, provided that meetings, pamphlets, policies, movements, causes, and crusades matter more to him than prayers and sacraments and charity. He is ours. And the more religious on those terms, the more securely ours. I could show you a pretty cageful down here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, first impressions of this statement, and please comment in the comment box also your first impressions hearing this. The first thing that comes up for me is just this division between patriotism and pacifism. And we may call it by different names today, but I just, that sort of like that clear division, right? Where you're either, I guess, for the country, patriotism, or you're passive, you're not really participating. And we had a lot of discussion over the summertime about spiritual bypassing that came up when spiritual practitioners didn't want to involve themselves whatsoever with anything that was going on in the world. And so there's like this clear division there. So that was the kind of the first thing that stood out to me. And then he's saying making that position that you take in relationship to the worldly issue as part of your religion until it becomes the main part. But I don't imagine that this is a very conscious thing when something becomes the main part. So for me, what was coming up is, how do you know when you're making a particular worldly whatever the main part of your spirituality? Like what you're doing for the world, or I guess we want to make sure that God is centered or spirituality is central. But it seems like something subtle can happen. That's what this passage seems to be indicating, where the cause or the crusade, which is obviously for the good in the eyes of those who are performing it, becomes central, and your spirituality becomes supportive of that more worldly cause or crusade and so on.
Yeah, I think that one of the first things that stood out to me was something around that as well, like the idea that the crusade, the idea that the cause is becoming more central. I really love this, what he wrote right before he started mentioning the causes and the pamphlets and the movements. He said, once you have made the world an end and faith a means, you've almost won your man. And I really like that he wrote that, because it's really challenging our worldview. Like, what do we actually believe? You know, like, what do we as individuals actually believe? Do we believe that the world is an end and that whatever I'm doing through this life is just a means, you know? And if that's the case, then that's a big issue, right? That's a big issue, because it means that I don't have a higher reality. I don't have a higher sense of purpose or a higher sense of God or anything like that, right? The world is an end, and whatever I do here is just like that. And basically any faith or anything that I do is a means to achieve that. And I think that is, I think that that's one of like the seminal problems of secular society. It's like there is no idea of, you know, leaving this material world. There is no idea of spirit versus matter. You know, it's just this. We're here. We're meant to enjoy. We're meant to do what, you know, the causes are there to kind of keep us engaged in this world. And then poof, that's it. And I was going to bring up another point, but I can't remember. Oh yeah, I remember.
Oh, thanks.
I remember. I remember the point. I think also like what was coming up for me here was like, what am I placing my time and my attention in. You know, I feel like he's really zeroing in on that, right? Because the pamphlets, the policies, the movements, the causes, that becomes my main, you know, that becomes my main purpose in life. And as such, it'll take up the majority of my time, it'll take the majority of my attention, right? I'm totally focused on this stuff. And therefore, my spiritual practices get left behind, you know? So it's like, if I am focusing on how to reach the widest majority with this pamphlet or with this cause or with the whatever, then my ability to go deep into my spiritual practices is going to simply like be curtailed. You know, it's not going to be as strong as if we were putting all of our attention on our spiritual practices. So that's also what was coming up for me.
It's interesting, like how, because I can see someone like myself, I can say I believe in like Krishna consciousness, for example. That's what I believe, but my actions may betray another sort of thinking. In other words, sometimes I wonder if we don't know what we believe. And of course, there's something that we are like adherents of, we're dedicated to, or we advocate for. But sometimes I wonder if, we're kind of, just like we're blind to we have a lot of blind spots when it comes to like our character, for example. And unless you like live with someone, those blind spots may never be realized by you, you know? It's only when you live with someone and they start pointing it out and you get triggered, and then you realize like, oh man, they got a point. And that it becomes evident to you that I have these blind spots. So similarly, when it comes to belief, like on the one hand, we can advocate for, or, you know, proselytize even for a particular belief, and we claim that that is our belief, but our actions betray something else. And yeah, I guess you could say actions in a sense betray a certain visceral belief. I don't know if you can categorize belief between the intellectual belief versus like a more emotive belief, like something that you really feel to the core of your bone. Then a lot of us believe on an intellectual level, but on an emotional level, we believe in a different way. And this is not to say that if you believe on it, if these two are not congruent, that somehow or other your belief is not substantial, or your faith is not substantial. But sometimes I'm wondering, I feel like I know people who would say that they believe in the goal of Krishna consciousness, which is, you know, to think only of Krishna and his leelas practically. That is the clear goal of Krishna consciousness, which is very, strictly speaking, is pretty unconcerned with worldly happenings. For the most part, if you look at it, at least how it's presented, how this Siddhanta of these things are presented, it's pretty unconcerned. I mean, it's like a Vedanta tradition. So Vedanta in general is very much sees the world as a problem. What this problems in the world itself is a problem. Kind of just like, now, of course, Bhakti takes a more like a soft approach. The world is not a problem. The world is actually a manifestation of God in one of his features, you can say. And therefore it should be engaged with that awareness and with the offering of everything back to God. So Bhakti definitely takes a softer approach, but still at the end of the day, like it's just like this moment to moment awareness, ecstatic awareness of God. That's the clear goal. You may say, I embrace it. That's my ideal. That's what I'm going for. But in our actions, that ideal kind of gets displaced from the center of our consciousness and becomes more peripheral as these other things start to take center stage. But I don't imagine it's always like a very conscious thing when that can happen. So
no. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a very conscious thing, and I think that that's where having Sangha really comes in, you know, because it's like you would hope that there would be, you would hope that you would have people by your side, like you said, like when you're living with someone, you know, like when you're living in an ashram, for example, it's like pretty confrontational, because it's like if you're not chanting, you know, your rounds, or if you're not showing up to the morning program, or if you're just like not doing your seva, your duties, someone in the ashram is going to be like, yo, like what is going on with you? You're not doing like this. And so many of us are not living in ashrams. And so I think it becomes very difficult. And I think a lot of people live alone nowadays. You know, I feel like this living alone, this individualistic society, right? And so it's really difficult to have this sense of accountability and ownership over one's actions, and even having an outside perspective on you, you know. And I personally think that having an outside perspective on you is so valuable. Like it might be annoying AF, but it's so valuable to like get called out and to just like take it and be like, oh yeah, maybe they do have a point. Like maybe I am actually like mean, or maybe I am actually like this, and I have to work on this stuff, you know. And so therefore, yeah, like when you were speaking, all I was thinking of like having that Sangha, like having that community of people around me that are keeping me accountable for my spiritual practices in a what's it called, in a loving way. But I think the problem comes when, okay, I'm gonna try to not step on any toes, or like, I think the problem becomes when you have Sangha that I feel like in our devotional community, I feel like I can say this, it has become bifurcated so much and divided so much, where it's like you're, you know, for the political leaders, and it's like this, and fighting for the cause, and stands with all the things, right? We stand with gays and BLM and this and Biden, whatever, you know, whatever it is, liberals. And then you have the devotees that are not on that side, and they're over here on that side. And I feel like each of those separate camps of devotees have their groups of people that are telling them that they are right in what they're doing.
It means, you mean to say that basically we would have to qualify Sangha, and when we say Sangha, we kind of have to qualify it. Otherwise, Sangha becomes people who think like us, and,
yes,
and it just
exactly.
kind of supports our own biases, whether they're good or bad. They just get reinforced, and that may be adding to the problem more than helping us solve it. I think I have another question I would just like to explore briefly. When you look at the karma yoga doctrine of the Bhagavad Gita, or even Krishna's his presentation of Bhakti in the very beginning, like in chapter 7 and chapter 8.
Yeah.
Like, for example, this one verse comes in chapter 8 where Arjuna is asking the question, how can I think of you at the time of death?
Yeah.
So Krishna said, well, the principle is that whatever you are absorbed in throughout your life, that will inform your final thought at the time of death, and that final thought will take you to your destination, good or bad. And therefore, and then he said, therefore, tasmat sarveshu kaleshu, at all times you should think of me, mam anusmana. If you want to think of me at the time of death, which was Arjuna's question, then throughout your entire life, you should be thinking of me at all times. And he says, but you also fight, which was his particular duty. And this is kind of how it relates to karma yoga, because the karma yoga doctrine of the Gita seeks to reconcile our desire for spiritual pursuit with our engagement with the world around us. And so in reconciling that, you know, here's the Bhakti element. You're thinking of me at all times, but you also do your particular duty, which in Arjuna's case was a worldly duty. He was involved in the world. And so devotees definitely feel justified. And with that understanding, they have a justification in scripture that is a proper approach as well, where your faith is in Krishna and you're pursuing spirituality. That's central for you, and you're also doing your duty, whatever you believe or understand the duty to be with the world. My arpito manobu there, and with your mind and intelligence fixed on me, you'll come to me. So that, I guess the question I'm that's coming to me is how I always had this question when I heard that verse, like, how the hell are you supposed to remember Krishna on like a moment-to-moment basis, or remember spirituality on a moment-to-moment basis, and be like super engaged with the world around you? Like, without forgetting, like, how is that even possible? Like, I'm saying this statement to you. This is what Krishna is teaching. Like, how do you even hear that? Think of me always, which is, you know, intense, and also engage in the world. Now, it seems unless you're at a state of like spiritual maturity, then these two are like competing forces, and one is bound to win the tug of war, so to speak.
Jagadish Hari is saying that we should ask Prabhupada answer to this question.
We have a problem there.
I think yeah, I mean I totally agree with you. When I hear this statement from Bhagavad Gita, it's like, whoa, like how am I even supposed to do this? Like I'm over here struggling chanting my rounds, trying to focus my mind on Krishna when I'm literally saying his name. I'm literally saying Krishna's name while engaging my tactile senses, and my mind is still elsewhere. So how am I supposed to like go on my daily activities and always think of Krishna? I think it's very difficult. I don't know. I'm just responding from a visceral place, and like the first thing that came up for me, I really like. Okay, I'll give you a very personal but clear example. I really think you need to find a spiritual community that you can be engaged in. Like, to be honest, like you need to find a spiritual community. Even if we ask Prabhupada, some would disagree. Hashtag 2021 Namras. Because currently I'm over here in Rio de Janeiro and in Brazil, and I'm like chanting my rounds and like, you know, reading a chapter a day of a spiritual text, and like going to some sanghas here and there, and like this online, of course. And I'm like kind of trying, but I have no devotional sangha around me except my partner in crime, who's a devotee as well. But we're both struggling, and we're just like here on the beach and like, you know, whatever, and this and this. And I kid you not, I tell him, I'm just like, you know, the beach is really nice. Like I really like the beach. Like I could stay here or whatever. And we have to have these like conversations with each other. Sometimes it's him and sometimes it's me. It's like, no, we have to go back to this city in Ecuador where we have a like-minded association. There's a mission there. There's a project. There are devotees there. There are programs that are being held there. There are kirtans there, and we need to be actively involved in the community there. And there's an opportunity for us to be actively involved because we've been invited to go and do that. And it's like, okay, I have to go do that because that is my only chance at trying to reach a level where I am thinking of Krishna, maybe not 24/7, but at least like, you know, more sincerely than I am now. And I think like when we're not a part of that community, and, you know, just to bring it up, I think that's why projects by devotees like Bodhika itself, like the Bhakti Center, you know, there's so many beautiful projects out there that are very inspiring to people because they're very much involving people, and it's very interactive, and it's like, come and be a part of this community and do service. You know, it's not just a come in, get your prasad and leave. It's like, we want you to be a part of this mission. And this project that's happening in Ecuador in this specific city, it's called Bhakti Tree. Also, it's like, come and be a part of our mission. Like, we want you to do service. And personally, like my first visceral response to that is like, yeah, we just have to like shift like what like my not my purpose in life is, but shift kind of like what my values in life are my values that I want to, you know, emulate that verse that is spoken in 8th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. I want to think of Krishna at the time of death. I want to think of Krishna 24/7. I want to be absorbed in Krishna's leelas. Then that means that I should be taking active steps in my life to make that happen. And personally, I'm sorry, I'm going off on a rant right now, but personally, I feel like when I start to involve myself, like I think it's okay to be like to like know what's happening in the world. It's like, okay, I know there's a new president. Okay, I know that, you know, whatever. Fine, like this. But once it starts to become like what C.S. Lewis has been saying, or what we've been saying through this chit chat, once it starts to overshadow my spiritual practices, or once it starts to become, you know, that's the end and my spiritual practices are the means for me to get to that end, then I think that that's a serious problem, you know. And I personally have gone through that. You know, I personally have gone through that when I first started taking bhakti seriously, and I was very into social justice. I was a social worker. I was very into like marching and doing all those things. Like it was a big shift for me where I was just like, I have to let go of this stuff if I want to be serious about this, you know? And that was from a very, very extremely new. Yeah.
That may not be true for everyone, but
that may not be true for everyone.
True for yourself.
Yeah, that may not be true for everyone, but it was definitely true for me. You know, it was definitely true for me in thinking like, if I want to, you know, I mean, it's not true for everyone.
Unless you feel that it is. Okay, fine.
No, I don't feel that it is. I don't feel that it is. But I will say, and I think that you can attest to this, I will say, because I took like a dramatic decision where I was just like, I'm going to stop being a social worker and I'm going to move into the ashram, you know? And I do feel like not everyone can do that. Not everyone can just be like, I'm taking a break from life and I'm
Nor
moving into
should
the ashram.
everyone do that.
Nor should everyone do that. However, I do think that like, what's this word that I'm looking for? I can't think of it, but like in the ashram, the teachings that you receive, whether that be by going to live in an ashram or whether that be by like being involved in a community and receiving that knowledge on a, what's that word? Not sequential. I'm thinking of this word.
Systematic.
Systematic. Thank you. In like a systematic way where it's not just like I'm popping into one thing and I'm popping, I'm not a flirt. I'm not a tourist, like a spiritual tourist. Like, no, I'm going
Right.
and I'm learning this like systematically. And whether that's by moving into the ashram or not, I think it's very necessary, like kind of that commitment to, and again, I'm gonna circle it back and I'm gonna end my rant. That commitment to like where I'm placing my faith. That commitment to like, okay, if I'm placing my faith here, then that means I actually have to do it, It can't just be hearsay.
Your
And if I'm
actions should reflect what your what's
yeah,
central for you.
and and to be honest, I kind of think that that's the same thing with politics. It's like if you're placing your faith in politics, then go be a politics person. Like go do it. Like
Right,
go
right.
do it 100% and go be super informed about politics and go for it, And like whenever I see people doing that and like they're like, I'm just like, good for you, like in a sense.
Yeah,
I'm
like
kind of just like,
I'm gonna be real. Like I've only recently seen some Tulsi Gabbard stuff. I was not following her whatsoever. And I know devotees were talking about her, and we, maybe felt salty that she didn't get. But I somehow some stuff was sent to me, and I was watching some Tulsi Gabbard stuff, and she sounds like real cool peeps, dude. Like,
yeah,
I'm like, I want to get to know her. Like, she sounded really cool, and I can respect. Like, she's really. I mean, she was a soldier in the wars. I mean, she has a lot of just practical experience, and congresswoman, a president elect. So a lot of respect if she's going to get absorbed in that. And she's coming from a place that's informed, and she seems also gentle-hearted, but also firm. Mad respect for someone who's doing that as well. I guess I have some final thoughts here before we go.
yes.
Also, I won't make mine a rant, but I do have some final thoughts. I wasn't trying to put you down or anything. I think it's just a general disease of our generations that we don't enter into things with sufficient amount of gravity.
Mm.
So whether it's our relationships or it's a religious movement or it's some sort of activism or whatever it might be, I think it's a general disease of our generations that we don't always have the gravitas, like we don't have the gravity to understand what it is we're actually entering into and what it's actually going to take for us to not lose ourselves and lose what is central to us while we're engaging at something. People enter into relationships, for example, just scaling it down a lot, and they lose themselves to the relationship and become destroyed because of it. I mean, I'm pretty much the tear bag for so many of my friends because of this problem, and I love being that because it's the only thing that's probably the closest I'll get to love in this life. So I have no problem doing that. I'm very grateful that I have friends who feel that about me, that they can trust me in that way and so on. But just to the point that we enter into a relationship without enough gravity of what it is we're entering into, and it destroys us. And using a language from the Shastra when talking about family life, for example, andakupam. Family life is also called quite a bit in the sacred text as a blind well. And the idea of calling a blind well is that you don't know what you're falling into, right? The blind well is covered with the creepers and you step on it and you fall in. So you enter into this thing and it becomes an andakupam. You don't know what it is you're falling into and you become destroyed. This word andakupam is also used, interestingly, this is geek stuff, but there's the prayers of the child in the womb. It comes in the third Bhagavad Purana. And he says he wants to stay inside the womb because he's like, now I'm having a realization of God, but the world outside this womb is andakupam. It's a blind well and I don't know what I'm going to fall into, and it'll just destroy my remembrance of you. So as a general rule of thumb, I don't think we have a lot of gravity when we enter into things. And so we end up losing what is central to us as we engage ourselves with whatever it is we're engaging with. whether it's activism or politics, or it's just a relationship, we can like lose what is actually central to us. And I do think that's a particular danger the more neophyte practitioners like ourselves would have to look out for, like the loss of what is central for us as we're engaging in this thing or that thing. You know, how many times do devotees, they have this real trepidation about not marrying a non-devotee, for example, where, like, I'm gonna be real, I'm not saying this as a standard, but I'm like, married, if the non-devotee is a vegetarian, it's probably the same as the devotees I'm looking at. Anyway, but they have like prudent trepidation around that because they don't want to lose their bhakti in that relationship, right? Bhakti is central to me, so I'm not going to get involved with a non-devotee relationship because I don't want to lose that. So similarly, when you're engaging with anything, there can be a loss of what's central to you unless you have enough gravity entering into that thing. Like, you really, that thing that is central to you is, I'm looking for a really strong word. It's like almost as intrinsic, like the ingress, it's like an ingress of that thing into your being, so much so that it becomes almost inherent to you. There's no question that it can be lost. And then when you're working from that space out to the world, then your faith can be said to, you know, that's the touching ground of your faith with the outside world without the risk of being lost. And I'm saying this, I was reminded of a quote from Aldous Huxley. I was reading this book about devils from him. Anyway, it's a history. It's not really about devils, but it has some really wonderful insights. The book is called The Devils of Loudun. It's a French township. Anyway, don't judge me. This is one cool statement that he has that I really appreciate, and this is where I'm coming from as I'm speaking now. He said, if hell is paved with good intentions, that's our cliche, it is because most people, being self-blinded to the inner light, are actually incapable of having a purely good intention. That really hit me heavy. He goes on to say, for this reason, action must always be in direct proportion to contemplation. The more inward we are, the more we may undertake outward activities. The less inward, the more we should refrain from trying to do good. I really like that a lot. And that's kind of where I'm coming from when I'm speaking now.
Yeah.
We haven't sat with ourselves, many of us, our generations, just as conditioned souls is a general problem. But I think in our generations more so than ever before because of the digital media. And so we're often brought away from ourselves by everything that we're engaged with, our computers, our phones, especially, and so on. So a lot of us haven't sat with ourselves long enough to really know what's going on inside. What type of demons are there and blind spots are there? We don't really know. And so if hell is paved with good intentions, it's because we're still blinded to our inner light because all this mess is there inside that we haven't confronted or dealt with. And having not really accomplished a good amount of that work, I'm not saying that these two can't happen concurrently. I think they can, but I think you would have to do pretty good inward work before you could really start to engage outwardly without there being a loss of self or a loss of what is, as you claim it to be, central to your heart, to your faith, or whatever it is. And so I guess, like, from me, when I hear, like in our spiritual communities, when I hear devotees or just spiritual people getting like really into this stuff, I have it like a suspicion about it. I have a suspicion about myself when I'm getting into it. I'm like, why am I talking about this? Like, I just want to be petty. Like, like, you know, and I know that, like, I know I'm going into this. I want to be a little bit, I still feel that I have good points, or I still feel that I have a point at least that's not completely unreasonable. Like, I do feel that about myself, but really, why am I getting involved with this? I haven't really done enough work on Jai Jagannath Das where my involvement in this sort of discussion or this sort of group isn't going to cause me to lose something that is important for me. by small degrees before whatever is central to me gets totally displaced and this thing becomes central. So I guess, if I had to speak it, I would present it as sort of a warning. Like if your faith really is central to you, then as you're saying throughout this chit chat, we should do those things which really encourage that faith and that meditation primarily. And if you like mad advanced, then you set to go. You can do whatever you want. But if you're not mad advanced, if you're one of those people that's like me, that's not mad advanced, that's hella distracted by digital media and other things that are not useful to my life whatsoever, I don't know if I can claim the gravity and the stability of inner life to be having the courage and audacity really to say that I'm ready to do good for the world. It's like, Negro, do good for yourself. That's my inner queen speaking to me. Really, queen, do good for yourself. Dr. Hill thyself, You're walking out there with a king with what is that? A king with no clothes on?
Yeah.
Get dressed, homie. Talking about I'm gonna do good for the world. There's like so many little kids now. It's so interesting to me. When we were growing up, what do you want to do? What do you want to be or do when you grow up? I was like, I want to be a fireman. I want to be a doctor. I want to be this. I want to be that. Now you ask these little kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to change the world. Shut your butt up. You want a Barbie house. You want the new PlayStation that's coming out, next week. Talking about I want to change the world. Like it's like the sentiment is beautiful on one level, and so that usually gets a pass. But I don't know if those things should really be, an influencer. This is becoming really popular. I want to be an influencer when I grow up. Where I don't know if those things should get passes anymore. If we're really intent about doing the greatest good for our relationships, for our families, for like let's start there. And then, okay, finally for the world, because you like on real solid ground, you are hella enlightened, then for the world. And I have to say also for the leaders who are taking positions where they are called to do good for the greater masses of people, I feel bad for y'all. Good luck. I'm going down. It's gonna be the theme song because too many of y'all have been doing that work either. Certainly not Donald Trump and this new guy also. I'm like, y'all look like y'all got a lot of work to be doing on yourself too. So anyway, that's kind of my general, I guess, mood and understanding.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, basically all of it, I agree with everything, and you and I have a very similar way of seeing things, even though sometimes people thank you so much, Adi Hall. Yeah. Even though sometimes people like to group me in the liberal and you in the conservative, which I don't really think is true at all. And I feel like with time I've been getting less and less liberal and more, I don't know, whatever. But
welcome to the scary discovery. That was exactly how I felt when I realized that. I'm like, oh my God, I'm not liberal. No, my friends are gonna judge me. They're gonna hate me.
Oh my God, that's how I start to feel. But no, I was just really while you were speaking, I was really thinking about just chit chat, and we always come to this point. Like this is the point that we always arrive to, and we open up the chit chat with saying that we are here to follow the dictum that material well-being follow spiritual well-being. So first and foremost, we need to get our chit together, our spiritual knowledge, our understanding of our relationship with the soul, our relationship with God, our relationship with this material world, and really like having that basic foundation. I was reading some notes on Bhagavad Gita that I had taken a while ago because I'm teaching some of my yoga students Bhagavad Gita, and so I always look back to the notes that I was taking when I was learning Bhagavad Gita from you in the Bhakti Center when we used to live there, and it was the beginning of chapter 9, I believe, and you were speaking about the secret knowledge, the most secret knowledge, the more secret knowledge, and the most secret knowledge, right? And this secret knowledge, that Krishna is speaking about, like first and foremost, is the understanding of the difference between consciousness, spirituality, spirit, and matter. And I remember you were like giving some commentary, because I would like to write down your commentary. Like most people don't know this. Like most people don't know this very simple kind of teaching of Bhagavad Gita, that there's a difference between my soul and this body. You know, there's a difference between spirit and material energy. And I feel like, you know, like just hearing you speak about, like, you have all these people going out and trying to do good, and like they have this sentiment of wanting to do good. But if that person, you know, XYZ person, is stuck on a pleasure principle way of living life, a way of living life that is basically just like completely.
Sorry to cut you off. Nam Ross, he's the king of our podcast. So if he says something, thank you, Nam.
Thank you, Nam. Thank you so much, Nam. No, I forgot what I was saying, but but just like if I'm like completely consumed by my senses, or if I don't have this basic knowledge, then it's like, how am I supposed to do good for the world? You know, if I don't even have that basic understanding of like myself. And
Srila Prabhupada would often say this, that you can do good if you know what is good. And a lawyer was arguing with Prabhupada about this point. And so the lawyer gave an example that, well, no, you don't have to know, like some things are just obvious, you can just do good. And he gave as an example that if an old lady like drops her cane in the street, something to this effect, and you go and help her, that is good. And Prabhupada said no. Unless you know what is good, you cannot do good, you know? And but even in that example, like, okay, why did you go to help the lady? You know, there was something that you probably learned, or there's some knowledge source that tells you that's good, and therefore you're doing it. So anyway, to your point, if you don't have this basic knowledge or foundation, how is anyone supposed to do good?
Yeah, basically. So I think that's a good place to end off, that we should have our foundations set. We should have our chit, our spiritual knowledge, together. And there's many opportunities to do that. If anyone is ever confused about how to do that, please reach out to Jai Jagannath Prabhu and he will point you in the right direction.
Thank you. So, I will point you in the right direction, away from me.
Krishna. Thank you all so much for joining. Thank you, Namras Prabhu and Pat. Thank you, Jagadish Hari and Adi Hall, for your wonderful comments. And thank you, Kristen Mitchell, for your wonderful comments as well. She brought up some interesting thing about post-truth. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it's really interesting, post-truth. So look into that. We can maybe talk about that some other time. So thank you all so much, and we'll see you next week on Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hari Hari Bol. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Later, fam.